The Houston Rockets again fell short of their championship goals after losing to the Los Angeles Lakers in the second round of the NBA playoffs. The Rockets have two former MVPs on their team in Russell Westbrook and James Harden, but after falling short again and again, year after year, they are faced with some of the toughest questions in the NBA heading into their most pivotal offseason in recent memory. Welcome back everybody, it's Courtside TV, and today we're going to be talking about the Houston Rockets. I have some strong opinions on this team, so buckle up. James Harden is obviously one of the best offensive players and scorers in the NBA, and to be honest, he's one of the best pure scorers in league history, but there have been times over the past couple of years where he's proven again and again that he does not show up in big playoff moments. He did it this year against the Lakers. He, did it in Game 7 against Oklahoma City, even though he did come up with that block at the very end of the game. He played poorly for most of that game and almost, had them lose in the first round. They almost didn't even get to the second round because of Harden's performances in the first round. Again, last year against the Warriors with an injured Kevin Durant at home, still couldn't get it done. Steph Curry got the better of him there. The previous year, 27 missed threes in a row for the Rockets. You can go back, years in the past, against the Spurs, Manu Ginobili's block on him to seal that series. There's plenty of history of James Harden not showing up in the biggest moments in the playoffs. And so I'm not really sure what the Rockets can do about that. They've tried many things to put around Harden to try to make this team work. And the common denominator has always been that James Harden just doesn't show up in the biggest moments. He's not clutch. And in the regular season, he'll average 35 points, whatever, and that's great. Those are great individual accolades and awards. He's won the MVP. He's been a finalist many times. He has individual statistic records and all sorts of things like that. But when it comes down to it, he isn't, a clutch performer, and he hasn't really been able to take his team over the hump to get to the next level. Harden is the centerpiece for this team, and barring any, crazy, drastic, blow-it-up move, he's going to be on the Rockets at least for next year and for the next couple of years. So they're going to have to find a way to restructure this team around him yet again. Maybe with a different coach, they'll be a little bit better. But they're going to have to find a way to maximize him and maybe reshuffle the team. They've tried it with Chris Paul. They've tried it with Russell Westbrook now. Before, they've tried it with Dwight Howard. They've had all sorts of iterations around Harden. And he is going to have to, find a way to come up big in the playoffs. Maybe that's conserving himself a little more in the regular season, not going so crazy with the points per game and not such a high usage rate type of guy. Getting him a little bit more rest, a little bit more, a better system around him in order to maximize his skill set in the playoffs. I personally would love to see it if whoever the Rockets hire as their next coach tried to use James Harden a little bit more off ball. Right now, his only threat is when he's on ball, dribbling with the step back, driving into the lane, kicking it out to shooters, whatever it is. That's been his, his whole game in the past couple years when they've had Mike D'Antoni. And we see it, when he doesn't have the ball, he kind of just stands up by the logo almost at midcourt and just kind of waits for either the ball to get to him or for the play to be run without him. If he's not in the play, he kind of checks out a little bit. And I would love to see, him running a little bit more cuts off ball, being used as an off-ball shooter, as a screener, whatever. And I think that works well with Westbrook. If Westbrook is driving and cutting into the lane, he can kick it out and have Harden on the wing to shoot it. That doesn't happen very often, in the current Rockets offense. And so if they're going to have this team together, with Westbrook still, assuming they don't trade him, whoever the next coach of Houston is going to have to find a way to get James Harden to buy into being a little bit more of an off-ball threat. And I really think that would round out his game and help the Rockets, just score points more consistently, even in these, late close game situations. You're not relying on Harden to be so ball dominant. He doesn't have to expend so much energy doing that. He can cut off ball, find those open looks, and he's good enough as a shooter that he can knock those down, of course. So that's what I would like to see them do with him. And then you have the Russell Westbrook problem, and this is where it gets really interesting for Houston because, this experiment, whatever you want to call it this year, it was pretty unsuccessful. There were points at the regular season where it looked like it was kind of clicking, and Russ was, becoming less of just an erratic shooter where he would just take all these threes and mid-range jumpers that, he doesn't make them efficiently. He was moving away from that and becoming, more of an attacking the rim type of guy, kicking it out, whatever. Those are the things that he's good at, right? Driving into the lane, either attacking the rim or finding those open shooters off the bounce, because there are guys who will collapse on him in the paint and he can kick it out. So with the Rockets lacking a center, Russ kind of almost becomes their de facto big man in a way, because he's the non-shooting threat on the floor. And so he's the guy who's kind of playmaking from the middle. It was a really interesting role, and it was really working for them for a couple months there. It ended up not, finding itself again in the bubble. They had some struggles, and of course, we can make excuses for Russ because he had the hamstring issue, he had COVID-19 before the bubble, and of course I'm not going to minimize those things, right? Obviously that's a big deal, and it probably impacted his conditioning as well as the hamstring. There's a couple things that you can point to and say, well, that's why he wasn't super good at the bubble. But again, these are problems that Westbrook has had throughout his career. He's always been a pretty inefficient shooter, but despite that, he's really confident with his shots. So, in those late game situations, and we saw this especially in the first round against Oklahoma City, I believe it was game 6, maybe game 5. But there was, late in the game, it was a close game. It was like a 1-2 point game, and Russ tries to drive in the lane and he gets stolen, and he goes the other way, and he takes the shot and air balls, and just like down the stretch a total meltdown. And late in those games you want James Harden taking those shots. Harden is a better player, he's a better shooter, even though he doesn't have a history of showing up in the playoffs, whatever. Neither does Westbrook, really. So Harden is, he's your clutch player, and he's the guy that you want taking those shots with the game on the line. But he doesn't demand the ball. Russ demands the ball, and, it just doesn't work out. Russ just isn't that type of guy, because if they block him out of the paint, he's going to take these stupid jump shots, and they're not going to go in. And so they have to really figure out how to balance these two together. Russ, there are changes he needs to make to his game as he gets older, loses a little bit of his athleticism. He kind of needs to become a little bit more crafty, slow it down, get a little bit better playmaking, finding those open guys, rather than just like attacking the lane or like doing those step back mid-range jumpers. He's got to evolve his game a little bit, because it didn't work for him this postseason. It hasn't really worked for him the past couple postseasons. And so the Rockets have this weird thing with Westbrook, and they might need a coach who will stand up to him and say, hey, this is what you're going to do, and stand up to James Harden as well and say, this is the system we're going to run, and late in these games, James is going to have the ball. It's not going to be Russ, whatever. And so, if Russ is still on the Rockets, they might have to, make some significant changes in their offensive system in order to both maximize both of these guys, and, maybe there's a chance that they trade him in the offseason. I don't know. He's making a lot of money for the next couple of years. His value has never been lower after seeing what he's done in the playoffs, So it's a really big, interesting question of what can the Rockets do with Russ. Maybe there's a couple teams that are interested in him, maybe some of these bad teams who are trying to sell tickets or just get themselves, a little bit of something going. I'll just point to like teams like Cleveland, Detroit, New York, are a couple that maybe would be interested. They have cap space, but the problem is I don't know what they have that Houston would be interested in getting back. There's a lot of potential deals you can talk about, but we are not really sure what Russ's value is right now. So there's just a lot of questions surrounding him going into the offseason. And then you've got the rest of the Houston role players, and these guys are all making, salaries that are movable, larger contracts that they could potentially do to reshuffle this team. And I would expect the Rockets to look at possibilities this offseason, because you can't just run this team back, Even with a new head coach, they're going to need to shuffle the pieces on this roster around, especially because Mike D'Antoni was such a specialized coach, and he, was acquiring players that really fit, specific roles. These are all specialists, 3-point corner specialists, defensive specialists. And that's why Harden had to do so much in their offense. And so depending on who they hire, they might be looking to get, a different variety of players. Maybe they're looking to get a center back, somebody who's a little cheaper than Capella, but somebody who can at least play that a little bit for them so they don't have to commit so fully to small ball. But these three guys, PJ Tucker, Robert Covington, Eric Gordon, I think that all three of them are on the trade block this offseason. Covington has the most value out of the three. He's valuable to contenders, and I think out of the three of them, he's the one that the Rockets are going to be most enticed to keep, just because I think he's the best player, and he's on a fair amount of salary. He's a great defender, good three-point shooter, and he's just good on a contender. So maybe if the right deal becomes available, they move him, or if it's a supreme blow it up situation, of course he would have value. But if they're just looking at keeping mostly the same team together, I think Covington will stay. Eric Gordon is on like a long-term contract. He's got 4 seasons left on his deal at around 18 to 20 million per year. That's a pretty bad contract for a guy at his age and with his injury history. Potentially there would be a couple teams that would be interested, but that doesn't have as much value. Maybe there's some deal to be done there just to get a different player in there that maybe fits a little bit better with whoever their new head coach is, and fits better into their starting lineup. But maybe there's an Eric Gordon deal. And then PJ Tucker is on an expiring contract. He's going to be 36 years old. And he's great. He's a good three-point shooter, especially from the corner, and a good defensive specialist. Basically played center for them ever since they went small ball. And he'll have at least a little bit of value to a contender, but I think out of the three of them, he's the most likely to be dealt, just because of his contract number and his age. Potentially there's a contender that would be willing to, take a chance on him, bring him in, see what they can do, and get the Rockets, just a different piece to shake things up, because again, they can't run this team back next year. It just is not going to work. This team is destined for, a second round exit. Maybe their ceiling is conference finals, but they're going to have to do some things to shake things up. So if it's not a Russell Westbrook trade, I would expect, out of these 3 players, 2 or 3 of them would potentially be moved this offseason. And then, I kind of talked about most of this already, but we'll just take a look at their cap sheet. You have Westbrook and Harden both on these massive deals for the next 3 seasons. They have those player options. I'm assuming that both of them would take those when that comes up. That's a couple years from now. But either one of these guys is going to be hard to move. Harden has more value. He's obviously a great player. Teams would love to have him if he was available for trade. I don't expect him to be this offseason, potentially next offseason, depending on how this next year goes for the Rockets. I don't think Harden will finish his career with Houston. I do anticipate him to be moved. If it's not on the duration of this contract, he probably would leave in free agency following the 2023 season, just because, this Rockets team really has no first round picks, and the way things are going, it's looking like they might not be great in the coming years. So maybe Harden would leave in free agency if he's not moved before the end of that contract. Same thing with Westbrook. I don't anticipate either of them to finish their careers in Houston. But that's kind of a topic for another day. Eric Gordon is obviously on that long-term deal. Robert Covington's got a couple years left. PJ Tucker will be expiring next season. So he has, a little bit of value as an expiring contract. Daniel House, he's a nice role player and he's cheap. So I would expect them to keep him if they're looking to, keep contending, and being, a competitive team. House is a nice player to have on that contract number. And then looking down further, Austin Rivers, he's got a player option. So maybe he'll take that, maybe not. He's nice to have, and he'll be good. Maybe he has a little bit of value if they do decide to, sell off role players for picks. I would think that some teams would be interested in maybe, a couple second round picks for Austin Rivers to a contender. I think that would be interesting. And then past that, that's really the roster. They've got Tyson Chandler, Thabo Sefolosha, Brewer Caboclo, Tamari Carroll, Jeff Green, Luke Bonmute, all free agents. None of them are significant. Chandler, Sefolosha, both of them might retire. Bonmute might retire. Tamari Carroll, Jeff Green. Jeff Green was a pleasant surprise for them. He played pretty well in the bubble, in their offense as their kind of small ball, 4-5 center-ish kind of guy. He was something, and maybe they'll bring him back on a minimum. But I mean, it's Jeff Green. It's not significant. And then Caboclo, they don't really care. So all these guys, they basically have their full team back next offseason, assuming that Rivers picks up that player option. And so, yeah, they basically have their entire rotation back. So they have, a lot of questions on what they're going to do, because they're going to have to shake things up. And so if I had to guess, I think we will see a PJ Tucker deal, if not in the offseason, most likely, prior to the trade deadline. Robert Covington certainly has value. Eric Gordon will be a little harder to trade, but maybe there's something to be done there. And I think they will explore trading Russell Westbrook. I don't know if there's any deal out there that they'll be really thrilled with, just because he doesn't have that much value. And all of the teams that might be interested probably don't have much, many pieces to give back to a contending Rockets team. The only thing I can think of is maybe if Cleveland was interested, there would be a Kevin Love for Westbrook swap, but I don't even know if that makes sense for Cleveland. I guess Westbrook's a better player than Love is right now, and he might sell a little bit more tickets, but with Sexton and Garland on their roster, I don't know if he fits. So again, the options are really, really limited for a Russell Westbrook deal. So I guess we'll have to see if anything like that happens, but if not, they're going to be exploring trading PJ Tucker, Eric Gordon, Robert Covington, and just reshuffling this team around James Harden just to see what they can do to, potentially change things up. And then as far as a new coach goes, there's a lot of options out there for him. There's all these guys out there like Ty Lue, and there's all these assistants that have been mentioned in the coaching searches, whatever. I don't really know which direction Houston is going to go. Reportedly, Daryl Morey will be staying on as GM, and that was a question that I had following the whole, Hong Kong China thing that happened early on this year with Daryl Morey and stuff. And obviously Tillman Fertitta probably wasn't happy with that. Rockets owner, he's kind of a goofy guy. And so I was anticipating maybe Daryl Morey to be let go from his position. Obviously, he's a great GM. He would be hired, within 30 seconds from some other team who was looking for somebody. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen. It's looking like Morey will stay on for another year at least as Houston's GM, and he's going to pick the next coach. And so it'll be interesting to see what Morey does. I think he's a really smart guy. He knows what he's doing with the whole three-point shooting and, maximizing points and whatever. I disagree with him a little bit on just the whole philosophy of let's send a 12-page paper to the league on how many points we were cheated out of during the Western Conference Finals because of officiating errors. It's all kind of corny to me, that whole thing. Analytics are great, and I totally agree with, maximizing the three-point shot and getting specialists and building your team that way. I think that's really admirable. I think that's awesome. But the stuff that I dislike about the Rockets is the whole, just being super upset about we don't get enough foul calls, when in reality, Harden shoots more free throws than anybody, and the refs bail them out plenty, and they just complain every time they don't get a call. So that's what annoys me about Houston, but I do think their team building philosophy is sound, and I think it could work. They just have kind of gotten a little bit unlucky over the past couple of years, and now they have no more draft picks to spend after using them all for Westbrook, trading Chris Paul for Westbrook. And so they're kind of in a tough spot right now. And so I think that this team will stay together at least for the next year, maybe a few. I would have been more inclined to think that they were going to do a blow it up, just a total fire sale, tear down, rebuild, had Daryl Morey been fired, but he has not been. And so I would expect him to at least keep James Harden and try to reshuffle the team around him. But yeah, I don't think there is going to be a huge blow it up for Houston this offseason. Again, the biggest move they can make is a Russell Westbrook trade, and maybe that happens, if there's the right deal out there for him. But I think they will keep Harden and just kind of try to remain competitive with James Harden as their star and just try to figure it out. Another version of the Rockets might be coming soon. They had Dwight Howard, they had Chris Paul, now Russell Westbrook. maybe there's another big change looming. So that's about it for my thoughts on the Rockets. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know that there has been a little bit of a shortage of videos this past week. It's been kind of busy for me, but I am still trying to talk about every team as they finish their season. So we've got Raptors and Clippers videos upcoming. Just as a side note, I mentioned this on Twitter, but I literally recorded a video for Denver, for the Nuggets, for their season wrap-up, off-season preview, whatever. And they ended up not losing. I recorded it prior to Game 5. They were down 3-1 at the time. I thought they were gonna, be out of there pretty quickly because I had the Clippers as my title favorite, and boy was I wrong about that. So that's kind of a topic for another day. I'll talk about Denver whenever they end up losing. Or even if they win the finals, whatever, I'll talk about them later. Clippers should be coming up soon. Toronto as well. I think they have an interesting offseason coming up. So Clippers and Toronto are coming soon. And that's going to be it for my thoughts on the Houston Rockets. And yeah, we'll be back next time with a new video. So I'll see you guys within the next couple of days. Peace out.